In this episode, I dive into The Firebird and the Fox, a classical Czech fairy tale penned by Karel Jaromír Erben, one of the most significant Czech literary figures of the 19th century. This tale is a part of a rich tapestry of folklore Erben collected during his travels across the Czech lands. Passionate about preserving oral traditions, he interviewed villagers, chronicled their stories, and wove them into timeless narratives that captured the moral and cultural spirit of the Czech people. First published in 1865 as part of his collection simply called Fairytales, these stories have since become inseparable from the childhood of Czech children. They serve, as all of the fairy tales do and should do, as moral compasses, guiding young minds to discern good from evil, help to shape a value system while also inspiring and uplifting readers of all ages. As a kid, growing up in what most would consider to be Eastern, but it really actually is Central Europe, in former Czechoslovakia, now Czech Republic, that's somewhat still holding onto the dream of democracy after decades, even millennia, of being subjected to various oppression systems, challenging the basic human rights and decency. Yes, I'm looking at you too, Russia. My parents were 10 years old, actually, when Russian troops violently entered our country, same as they did a few years back with Ukraine, and just made themselves home. Then there were decades of communism that branded everything west from us, too depraved, too liberal, too evil, prohibited people to consume Western media or even learn any other language than Russian. We've been through it so many times that our folklore and fairy tales became sort of a vestige of our cultural sovereignty, something we hold very dear up until today. Now, as a queer kid growing up in the 80s and 90s Czech, I would understandably be confused with the messaging, right? Why would someone face up to the great evil, slay the monsters, be it literal or metaphorical, travel the world to find themselves and embody an archetype of hero's journey only to get a princess? That is always the number one prize, right? Well, now I understand that under the guise of heteronormative tendencies of our past, the message actually is love. Simple. Love makes all of this worth it. And so in my retelling of The Firebird and the Fox, I'm putting a little queer spin on this timeless tale, telling it in a way my little childhood self would love to hear it. The Firebird and the Fox, with its themes of courage, humility and resilience, stand as a shining example of the fairy tale's power to educate, transform and enchant. This tale also perfectly mirrors the energy of Sagittarius season. It features a journey of discovery and adventure, echoing Sagittarius' innate wanderlust and quest for higher meaning. The main character embarks on a mythical quest to capture the magnificent Firebird, a quest that mirrors Sagittarius' fiery ruler Jupiter and its connection to enlightenment and illumination. The story's transformative themes align with the late November's transitions into late autumn, a time when the warmth of firelight is cherished and the world begins its quiet preparation for renewal. So grab your tea or coffee, sit back comfortably, ideally with a cat or two by your feet or in your lap, and join me as we explore this treasured Czech story and its timeless resonance with the stars and the seasons. Once upon a time, in a kingdom where the sun kissed the earth in lazy strokes and shadows stretched like a yawning cat, there was a garden. Not just any garden, mind you, but the king's pride and obsession. A vast expanse of winding paths, silver streams and rare trees from lands known and unknown. But all these marvels paled in comparison to the tree that stood at its center. This tree was the stuff of legends. Each day, as the first rays of sunlight brushed its branches, a single blossom would unfurl, trembling as though the world held its breath. By twilight, the flower gave way to a fruit, a golden apple, radiant as though the sun itself had kissed its skin. Yet by the dark hours before dawn, the apple would vanish, leaving behind only the faint scent of its impossible sweetness. The king, a man forged of iron and ambition, was consumed by this mystery. His joy in the garden had long been replaced by bitterness. The vanishing apples were no longer mere thefts, they were insults to his dominion, affronts to the divine order of things. His frustration festered until it filled the palace like smoke from a dying fire. In his desperation, the king summoned his 3 sons to the great hall. They stood before him, each casting a long shadow in the flickering torchlight. The eldest, broad and golden-haired, radiated the confidence of a man destined for the throne. The second son, quieter but no less imposing, carried himself with the weight of steady strength. And then there was the youngest, Willem, who lingered at the edge of the room like a forgotten echo. Willem's brothers towered over him in more ways than one. While they championed in feats of arms and glory, Willem spent his days amongst books and between the open sky, sketching the way light played upon leaves or the twists of ivy along a forgotten wall. The court dismissed him as a dreamer, a weakling. Even his father seldom addressed him without a sigh of disappointment. "Our kingdom thrives by the grace of this garden," the king said, his voice trembling with anger. "Yet its heart is stolen from us night after night. Who among you will guard the golden apple and bring me the thief?" "I will," said the eldest, stepping forward with a bow. His armor gleamed, and his voice was strong, certain. "Very well, do not fail me." That night, the eldest son stationed himself beneath the tree. He was armed with a crossbow and girded in courage, his heart ablaze with determination. Yet, as the hours wore on, the quietude of the garden waited upon him like a heavy cloak. The soft rustle of leaves and the occasional chirp of unseen creatures lulled him into a drowsy haze. By the time dawn kissed the horizon, the golden apple was gone. The second son fared no better. Though he sat beneath the tree with an air of stoic resolve, the night whispered its strange lullaby until sleep claimed him. Another apple vanished. At last, Willem approached the king. His brothers mocked him openly, their laughter sharp as blades. "What can he do that we could not?" they jeered. The king's gaze was heavy as it rested on his youngest son. "You are no warrior," he said, the words cutting more deeply than he likely intended. "Why should I entrust this task to you?" Willem lifted his chin, his voice soft but steady. "Let me try." That night, Willem prepared for his vigil with care. He carried no weapon save a small dagger and brought with him a hedgehog skin, which he spread across his lap as he settled beneath the tree. His brother's failures waited upon him, but he had no time for doubt. "If I should falter," he whispered to himself, "this will wake me." And as the night wore on, with every little drift towards the land of sleep, Willem felt a prick of the hedgehog skin that helped him stay awake. As midnight neared, the air thickened, humming with a strange energy. From the shadows of the sky came a light, a flicker, then a blaze. The Firebird descended like a living comet, its feathers burning with an otherworldly glow. Its eyes gleamed with an intelligence ancient and unfathomable. The bird alighted on the tree, its talons curling around the branch that bore the golden apple. Willem's breath caught as he watched, awe and trepidation warring within him. Slowly, he reached for his dagger. With a silent prayer, he threw it. The blade grazed the Firebird's wing, drawing forth a cry that echoed through the garden like the wail of a distant storm. The bird fled into the night, its fire trailing behind it like the tail of a shooting star. But in its haste, it left behind a single golden feather. The king was delighted with the feather. It was so beautiful and radiated such a luminous glow that at night the royal hall needed no other light. Courtiers, knowledgeable in such matters, claimed that the feather came from the legendary Firebird, and that it was worth more than all the treasures in the king's vaults. From that moment, the Firebird no longer visited the garden, and the golden apples ceased to disappear. Yet the king found no joy in this. His thoughts lingered only on the Firebird, and as powerful men do, he grieved deeply for not possessing it. The sorrow weighed so heavily upon him that his heart began to fail. One day, he summoned his 3 sons to him and said, "My dear children, you see how I grow weaker with each passing day. But I know this, if I could hear the Firebird's song, my heart would revive. Whoever among you brings me the Firebird alive, so it may sing for me, shall receive half my kingdom immediately, and, upon my passing, inherit the throne." The 3 sons prepared for their journey without delay, bidding their father farewell before setting out to seek the Firebird. Not long after they departed, they came to a forest where 3 paths diverged. "Which way shall we take?" asked the eldest brother. "There are 3 of us and 3 paths before us," replied the second. "Let's each take one. We'll have a better chance of finding the Firebird that way." "And who will take which path?" "You 2 can choose first," said the youngest brother, Willem. "I'll go whichever way is left." The brothers agreed, each selecting a path. Then one of them suggested, "Let's leave a sign here at this crossroad, so whoever returns first will know how the others have fared. Let each of us plant a twig in the ground. If someone captures the Firebird, his twig will blossom." The plan pleased them. Each planted a twig by the side of the road he had chosen, and then they parted ways. The eldest prince travelled on until he reached a hill. Dismounting, he let his horse graze while he stretched out on the grass. Taking out his provisions, he began to eat. As he did, a red fox crept toward him. "Please, kind sir," the fox begged, "I am so hungry. Share a bit of your food with me." But the prince, upon seeing the fox, snatched his crossbow and loosed a bolt at it. Whether he missed or not, the fox vanished into the underbrush. The second brother fared no better. When he stopped in a wide meadow to rest and eat, the same red fox approached him, pleading for a morsel. But he too reached for his weapon and shot at the fox, which swiftly disappeared into the tall grass. For Willem, the road was long and wound through forests where the trees leaned close, their branches gnarled like ancient fingers. It was there, beneath the canopy of a moonless sky, that Willem encountered the fox. It was no ordinary creature. Its fur gleamed a burnished auburn, and its eyes shone with coppery light. It regarded him with a knowing air, as though it had been waiting for him all along. "Greeting, Prince," the fox said, its voice smooth and sly. "Why do you wander these woods?" "I seek the Firebird," Willem replied, uncertain whether he should trust the strange creature. The fox tilted its head, a glimmer of amusement in its gaze. "Then you are in need of a friend. I am Copperwing, and I can guide you, if you are willing to listen. But first, please, kind young master," the fox said, its voice soft and pleading, "I'm terribly hungry. Won't you spare me a bite to eat?" The prince, without thinking, tore off a piece of smoked meat and tossed it to the fox. "Come here, don't be afraid of me, Copperwing," he said with a kind smile. "I can see you're hungrier than I am, and today there's enough for both of us." With that, he divided his meat into 2 portions, one for himself and one for the fox. Copperwing ate until he was full, then looked up at the prince with bright, clever eyes. "You fed me well, young master," the fox said, "and now I shall repay you in kind." Copperwing's guidance led Willem to the Copper Castle, where the Firebird was held. But before they entered, the fox gave him a warning. "Inside, you will find 3 cages. One is simple and wooden, the others gilded and adorned with jewels. Choose the wooden cage, or you will regret it." Willem nodded, but when he laid eyes on the Firebird, its flames casting molten light upon the cold stone walls, he hesitated. Surely such a magnificent creature deserved a gilded cage. Ignoring Copperwing's advice, he reached for one of the golden cages. The moment he placed the Firebird inside, it shrieked a sound so piercing that the castle trembled. Guards swarmed the chamber, and Willem was seized. The king was a figure of stark majesty, his robe woven from threads of molten metal, his crown a lattice of sharp copper thorns. His eyes burned with the fire of a forge, and his voice rumbled like a distant storm. "You dare attempt to steal my Firebird? Speak quickly, boy, before I decide your fate." Willem, though trembling, held the king's gaze. "I did not come to steal, but to bring the bird to my father, whose heart has been broken by its theft of the golden apples. If I offended you, I will make amends." The Copper King regarded him in silence, his expression inscrutable. At last he said, "Your words have the ring of truth, but your actions betray vanity. Very well, I shall spare your life, but only if you bring me the horse Goldmane from the Silver Castle. Fail, and you shall remain here forever." And so Willem left the Copper Castle with a heavy heart. At the edge of the forest, Copperwing waited, its amber eyes gleaming with quiet reproach. "You did not listen," the fox said. "I thought the bird deserved better," Willem admitted, his voice low. Copperwing's gaze softened, though its tone remained sharp. "And now you must face the consequences. But fear not, I will guide you still." Their journey to the Silver Castle was perilous. the landscape shifting into strange, otherworldly forms. They crossed a river that shimmered like liquid moonlight, and climbed mountains whose peaks pierced clouds like jagged teeth. At last, the castle came into view, its spires gleaming like frost under the starlit sky. "Inside," Copperwing said, "you will find Goldmane, the horse whose mane glows with the light of the sun. In its stable hang 2 bridles, one plain and completely unassuming, and the other encrusted with jewels. Take the plain bridle and nothing more." Willem nodded, but once again the temptation proved too great. The jeweled bridle sparkled like stars caught in silver threads, and he could not resist. The moment his fingers brushed its surface, a great cry rose from the stables. Goldmane reared, its golden mane blazing, and once again Willem was captured and brought before the Silver King, a figure of cold elegance whose gaze seemed to cut through flesh and bone. "You have trespassed in my domain," the king said, his voice like the crack of breaking ice. "Why should I spare you?" Willem recounted his tale. The Silver King listened in silence before issuing his decree. "You may have the Goldmane, but only if you bring me the one who dwells in the golden castle at the Black Sea, Prince Gildentress." The journey to the Golden Castle was darker still. The Black Sea stretched vast and silent, its waters rippling like ink under a pale moon. At its center rose the castle, a beacon of impossible light that defied the encroaching void. The Black Sea stretched before them like an endless abyss, its surface rippling with shadows that seemed to breathe. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of salt, and something darker still, something ancient. In the distance, the golden castle rose from the sea, a luminous beacon against the void. Its towers glowed with a light that seemed to emanate from within, casting rippling reflections on the water. Willem stood at the edge of the shore, his heart caught between awe and trepidation. Beside him, Copperwing's fur glinted in the moonlight, its amber eyes fixed on the castle. "It is said the golden castle exists between worlds," the fox murmured, its voice carrying a note of reverence. "Be cautious, Prince. This is not a place where hearts are safe." "In that castle," said Copperwing, the sly red fox, "rules the Sea Queen. She has 3 sons, and the youngest of them is the boy called Gildentress that the Silver King desires to claim his own. Go to the Queen as an envoy of Silver King and ask for one of her sons to join his court. But heed me well. When she bids you choose, take the one who is dressed most humbly." Willem did not respond. His gaze remained fixed on the castle, and as he stepped into the small boat awaiting him, his pulse quickened. The journey across the sea was silent, save for the rhythmic splash of the oars. The closer he came to the castle, the brighter its light grew, until it seemed to envelop him completely. Inside the golden castle, the air was different, cool and faintly perfumed, carrying a melody that seemed just out of reach. Willem was led through gilded halls by a servant who moved with an almost ethereal grace. At last they reached a great chamber, where a figure stood bathed in the light of 1,000 candles. Prince Gildentress. He turned as Willem entered, and for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath. Gildentress was beautiful in a way that defied description. His golden hair cascaded like molten sunlight, and his eyes, deep, piercing, and filled with a quiet sadness, met Willem's with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Welcome," Gildentress said, his voice like the whisper of waves against the shore. "I have been expecting you." Willem found himself momentarily speechless. He inclined his head, managing at last to say, "I come seeking your aid." Gildentress smiled, though there was something wistful in it. "Many have sought me," he replied, "but few have understood the price of my help." Willem came to understand what Copperwing had meant. Gildentress moved with a grace that seemed otherworldly, and his laughter, rare as it was, carried a weight that lingered in the air long after it faded. Yet beneath his radiance there was a loneliness that mirrored Willem's own. They spoke often, their conversations ranging from the trivial to the profound. Willem found himself drawn to Gildentress in ways he could not fully articulate. There was a warmth in the prince's presence, a sense of belonging that Willem had never known. As they stood on balcony overlooking the sea, Gildentress turned to Willem. "Why do you seek Firebird?" he asked, his voice soft but probing. Willem hesitated. "My father demands it. He believes it will restore his glory, his sense of control." "And what do you believe?" Gildentress pressed, his gaze unwavering. "I believe—" Willem paused, searching for words. "I believe I must prove myself, not to him, but to myself, to show that I am more than what they see." Gildentress studied him for a moment, then smiled, a true smile, one that reached his eyes. "You are already more than they see, Willem." The sound of his name on Gildentress's lips sent a warmth through Willem's chest. He wanted to say something, to close the distance between them, but a moment passed, and Gildentress turned back to the sea. "You must first seek an audience with my mother, and I wish you all the luck in the world." The Sea Queen received the prince with a warm, gracious smile. When he explained his purpose, she led him into a grand chamber where her 3 sons sat spinning at their wheels. They were so alike that no mortal eye could tell one from the other, and their beauty was so extraordinary that the prince's breath caught in his chest as he gazed into their luminous eyes. Each wore a headscarf to conceal their hair, and their gowns told their own stories. One son wore a scarf and robes woven with threads of gold, spinning with a gleaming golden spindle. Another was adorned in silver-embroidered garments, his fingers deftly turning a silver spindle. But the third had only a plain white scarf on his head and a simple white gown spinning with an ordinary wooden spindle. "Choose whichever one you wish," said the Sea Queen. The prince pointed to the one clothed in white. "That one shall be mine," he said firmly. "I mean, that one shall travel with me to join Silver King in his court." "Well, well," the queen said with a laugh, her tone sharp with curiosity. "That choice did not come from your own wits. Wait until tomorrow, then we shall see." That night, the prince could find no rest, his mind troubled by the trials ahead. At the first light of dawn, He wandered into the castle's garden seeking solace among its blossoms and winding paths. There, as if summoned by his thoughts, Gildentress in white appeared before him. "If you wish to know me tomorrow," he whispered, his voice as soft as the wind through the trees, "pay attention to the one around whom a little golden fly will hover." Before he could reply, Gildentress vanished as swiftly as he had come. By noon, the Sea Queen summoned the prince once more to the chamber of her sons. "If you can recognize the one you chose yesterday, he shall be yours," the queen declared. "But if you fail, your life will be forfeit." The three sons stood side by side. This time, all wore shimmering gowns and golden headscarves, their golden hair blazing so brilliantly that the prince could barely keep his eyes open against the light. For a long moment, he was overwhelmed by their splendor, his vision blurring with the brilliance. Then, out of the dazzle, he noticed a tiny golden fly circling one of the young men, resting momentarily on his shoulder, as if it had known him all its life. "He is the one I choose," he said, pointing with certainty. The Sea Queen narrowed her eyes, astonished that he had succeeded. "You may have found him, Gildentress, but he is not yours yet," she said. "Rest here for a few days now. There will be one more task you must complete, and it will require all of your strength." Morning broke with a golden haze, and the queen, with her eyes like frost, gestured from the tower window toward a vast pond glistening at the forest's edge. In her hands she held a tiny golden sieve, delicate as a butterfly's wing, and placed it into the prince's palms. Her smile was a knife sheathed in silk. "If you drain that pond with this sieve by nightfall, I will allow for my son Gildentress to travel back to the Silver Castle with you," she said, her voice a melody of sweet malice. "But if you fail, your head will fall." Willem, his heart heavy with the impossibility of the task, trudged to the pond. He knelt at the water's edge, dipping the sieve into the shimmering surface. He lifted it, but the water, mocking him, slipped through the golden threads, leaving not even a trace. Again and again he tried, and each time the sieve returned empty as hollow laughter. Defeated, he sat on the embankment, the sieve cast aside, and stared into the sky's cold, indifferent blue, despair curling in his chest. And then, as if conjured from his very longing, he was there, a pale young prince with hair like sunlight spun through gold. "Why do you look so sorrowful? How can I be anything but?" Willem replied bitterly, lifting his eyes to him. "The queen has set me an impossible task, and without it, I will never win you. I will never be able to take you to the Silver King. Neither can I live if I fail. Be at peace," he whispered, his voice like the rustling of leaves in a magical garden back home. "What is impossible for you is not impossible for me." "Why are you helping me?" Willem asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gildentress's gaze held his. "Because I see in you what I have longed to see in myself. Courage and the will to defy." With a single fluid motion, he took the sieve and waded it into the pond. A strange wind stirred, and the water began to bubble and boil. Clouds rose, thick and ghostly, spilling from the pond as if it were a cauldron. The air grew dense, veiling the world in a heavy mist, where even the trees became little more than phantom shapes. And just like that, the pond was empty. And at that moment, in the distance, the prince heard the steady rhythm of hoofs against the earth. He turned, and there was the fox, his russet fur gleaming, and behind him, the horse with golden mane, that would be his, in exchange for delivering Prince Gildentress back to the Silver Castle. "Don't dilly-dally," Copperwing said sharply, his voice crackling with urgency. "The Sea Queen would never let you leave, even if you fulfilled all of her tasks. Take the boy and ride. There is no time to lose." Willem obeyed without question, pulling the pale prince with golden hair onto the horse before spurring it forward. The path unfurled beneath them like a ribbon of moonlight, but behind them the fox was at work. His great bushy tail swept away the bridges, filled the valleys and raised mountains in their wake, stitching the world back together as it had been. The prince's heart was a tangled web of joy and dread. He had won the golden-haired prince, but now he must trade him for Silver King's golden-maned horse. The closer he came to the Silver Castle, the heavier his spirit grew, until even the rhythm of his horse's gallop could not lift his mood. When they stopped in a dark forest for the night, Gildentress asleep next to the fire they started earlier, the fox approached Willem. "You're reluctant to trade him, aren't you?" said Copperwing, looking down at the sleeping golden-haired prince. "Afraid to lose what you fought so hard to win?" "How can I not be?" Willem replied, his voice breaking. The fox only nodded. "I have helped you this far. I won't abandon you now." With a single leap, he transformed, his sleek form flipping mid-air. When he landed, he was no longer a fox, but a young prince, another Gildentress, perfect in every detail. "Leave the true prince here in the forest. I'll make sure he'll sleep safely and protected all the way until you can meet again," the fox instructed. "And take me to the king of the Silver Castle. He will trade me for the gold mane. Chop chop, don't dilly-dally." The plan unfolded just as the fox had promised. The king of the Silver Castle was entranced by his new prize and gave the prince the magnificent gold mane, its golden reins glinting in the torchlight. A great feast was held in honor of the golden-haired prince, and the king, full of pride, asked his lords for their thoughts. "A beautiful little thing he is, beyond compare," one of them said, though his eyes narrowed as he added, "But is it just me, or does he have a fox's eyes?" No sooner had the words left his lips than the golden-haired prince let out a laugh, a low, wild sound, and in a blink he was a fox once more. With a flick of his tail, he darted from the hall, leaving nothing but startled cries in his wake. The fox found Willem again, Goldmane by his side. Together they journeyed toward the Copper Castle, where the Firebird awaited. But the weight of another sacrifice loomed over the prince, for he knew the king of that castle would demand Goldmane in exchange for the Bird of Flames. "Is it not a pity to lose such a splendid steed for another prize?" the fox asked, his tone almost teasing. "It is," the prince admitted. "But if it can save my father, then no price is too great." "Very well," the fox said, his grin both mischievous and wise. "Once more, let me help you." Once again, the fox worked his magic, transforming himself into a golden steed, so alike to Goldmane that even the sharpest eye could not tell the difference. The Copper King was overjoyed by the exchange and handed over the Firebird, shining brighter than the sun. But during the celebration, one of the lords spoke out. A magnificent steed, to be sure, yet Does its tail not seem a bit too bushy, almost like a fox's? And just as before, the fox revealed himself, laughing as he escaped into the night. He caught up to Prince Willem as he rode through the deepening forest with the real Goldmane and the Firebird safely in tow. The journey home stretched long, but with each passing mile, a sense of longing for Gilden Tress and a peculiar unease crept into Willem's chest. I must leave now, but I'll see you again. Beware, Prince, Copperwing said at last, breaking the silence as they approached a familiar crossroad from the beginning of our story. Not all foes wear unfamiliar faces. What do you mean? Willem asked, but the fox offered no reply, one moment here, gone in a coppery glint the next. Of course, a day or so ago, his brothers returned to the crossroads, one from one path, the other from another. Both were empty-handed, their quest unsuccessful. They arrived at the same time and saw, to their dismay, that their twigs they planted were dry and barren, while the youngest brothers had grown into a splendid tree. And in that moment, dark thoughts blossomed in their hearts. By the time Willem reached the gates of his father's kingdom, the first blush of dawn streaked the sky. The sight of the familiar walls brought a fleeting sense of relief, but as the gates opened, his brothers' figures emerged from the shadows, their faces veiled in forced smiles. "Brother!" the eldest called, stepping forward with arms wide. "You have been successful!" The second brother moved closer, his gaze lingering on the Firebird and Goldmane. "Father will be overjoyed," he said, though his tone carried an edge Willem could not ignore. Willem dismounted, his exhaustion evident, but before he could speak, his eldest brother clapped him on the shoulder. "Come, let us escort you to the king. Surely he will reward your bravery." The words were honeyed, but there was something in their eyes, something dark and restless, that made Willem's stomach tighten. In the dim corridor leading to the throne room, the brothers' true intentions were revealed. With swift and practiced cruelty, for they wrestled and beat up Willem, who always preferred books to fighting many a times when he was younger. They seized him, their hands rough and unforgiving. "You have always been the weak one," the eldest hissed, his voice low and venomous. "And yet you would claim the glory that belongs to us?" The second brother laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Father would never believe it was you who captured the Firebird. Not when we tell him the truth that you perished on the journey and we avenged your death by bringing these treasures ourselves." Willem struggled, but he was no match for their combined strength. They dragged him into the shadows of the courtyard, where the air was thick with the scent of damp earth. "Brothers, please!" Willem pleaded, his voice raw with desperation. "Your please means nothing," the eldest spat. "This is where your story ends." With that, they struck him down, their blades swift and merciless. The courtyard fell silent as Willem's lifeless body slumped to the ground, his blood darkening the stones beneath him. The brothers, their hands trembling only slightly, exchanged glances before attempting to capture the Firebird and take the Goldmane, who, of course, would resist. The two men retreating into the shadows, the Firebird, still encaged, let out a mournful cry, its fiery feathers dimming as though it mourned the prince's fate. As the night approached, from the deepening shadows at the far edge of the courtyard, Copperwing emerged. his movements silent yet deliberate. The fox's eyes gleamed like molten copper in the dim light, reflecting both fury and resolve. It approached Willem's still form, circling him once before stopping at his side. "Foolish boy, you did not heed my warnings. Yet even now, you deserve a second chance." The fox's ears flicked as it glanced toward the Firebird. "The life and death of mortals are strange, fleeting things, but there are forces older and deeper than your brother's treachery." Copperwing tilted its head, considering. Then, with a sly grin, it spoke again, its tone shifting into something ancient, something primal. "The waters of life and death will undo this travesty, but only if you hold your end of the bargain, little prince." The fox darted away, quick as a shadow, disappearing into the night. When it returned, it carried 2 small flasks, one shimmering with a silver light, the other dark and inky as the void. First, Copperwing poured the inky liquid over Willem's body. The dark substance seeped into the prince's wounds, and for a moment, the stillness around him deepened, as though the very air held its breath. Then, with the silver liquid, the fox traced a delicate pattern over Willem's chest, the glow intensifying as the drops met his skin. "Rise now, prince," Copperwing said, its voice almost a chant, "for your story is not yet finished." At first, there was nothing, a long, agonizing stillness. Then, Willem's chest rose sharply as he gasped for air, his eyes flying open. "Copperwing?" Willem rasped, his voice weak but steady. The fox grinned, its teeth gleaming. "Still as slow as ever, I see." Willem sat up, his hands brushing the ground for support. What happened? My brothers?" "Ah yes, your dear kin," Copperwing interrupted, its tone dripping with sarcasm. "They've claimed your triumph as their own and left you to rot, but fear not. I've taken measures to ensure your return is memorable." The Firebird stirred in his cage, its feathers regaining their brilliance. Goldmane approached, its mane shimmering once more with golden light. "You will confront them," Copperwing said, its voice firm, "but not as a broken prince. You will return with the Firebird, Goldmane, and the truth on your side, and perhaps a bit of my own flair to guide you." The halls of the castle were cloaked in quiet anticipation when Willem entered through the great doors. His steps echoed sharply against the stone, accompanied by the soft tread of Goldmane's hoofs and the steady glow of the Firebird, still caged, but resplendent in its fiery glory. Copperwing padded silently at his side, its expression unreadable. The court turned as one to behold the sight of the youngest prince, alive when he had been presumed dead. His brothers stood before the throne, their faces pale beneath their forced smiles. The king, who had been listening to their false tales of bravery, rose sharply from his seat. "Willem?" he said, his voice a mixture of disbelief and confusion. The eldest brother was the first to recover, his expression shifting into one of incredulous anger. "It cannot be!" he hissed. "You were betrayed?" Willem finished, his voice steady but edged with cold fire. He stepped forward, and the Firebird flared in its cage, casting the room in shifting hues of gold and crimson. "Indeed, I was." Gasps rippled through the court as Willem recounted the truth, the journey, the trials, the treachery. His words were measured and calm, but his gaze burned with the quiet intensity of a storm waiting to break. "You were left for dead the king asked, his voice shaking with disbelief as he turned to the elder princes. The brothers stammered, their carefully crafted lies brought to light in the Firebird's glow and illuminated by the shimmer of golden mane. The trial was swift. The brothers, stripped of their titles and banished, left the court in disgrace. Willem, however, was met with a wave of awe and reverence. The court erupted in cheers, the people proclaiming him the savior of the kingdom. But amidst the celebration, Willem's thoughts drifted to a golden-haired prince who had shown him a kindness that burned brighter than any triumph. "When you restored me from death, Copperwing," Willem inquired, "you spoke of my end of a bargain? What exactly is that meant to be?" "Simply to live authentically." Copperwing nudged his leg, drawing him from his thoughts. "Your father's eyes are upon you." Indeed, the king was watching him, his expression unreadable. At last he stepped forward, his hand resting on Willem's shoulder. "You have proven yourself, my son," he said, his voice filled with something Willem had never heard before. Pride. "You've always been steadfast in your own truth, and showed up to every grueling task with kindness and character. Only those who sit on a throne of their own truth deserve to rule the kingdom. Now, I do have a few good years in me still, but when time comes, I will cross over to the land of ancestors with ease and pride, knowing that our kingdom is in the safe hands of my only son." "About that," Willem said, glancing a side look at Copperwing, "about my own truth, we might need to have a talk." I would like to tell you that the great king accepted Willem's desire to bring Prince Gildentress to the court to live and eventually rule the kingdom by his side. But we simply do not know about those things. After all, his end of the bargain was living authentically, nothing else. What we do know is that the Firebird had been released into the royal gardens, its glow now illuminating the very tree whose fruit it had once stolen. King's health finally restored. Goldmane remained in the royal stables, a symbol of Willem's triumph. And no longer after that, Willem, finding no solace in the court's new admiration, set on the journey again, Copperwing by his side, his thoughts lingering on the faraway forest, on Gildentress. When they finally stood face to face again, the air between them seemed to hum with unspoken words. At last, Gildentress spoke, his voice soft but steady. "You faced death and defied it. Why?" "Because you showed me that there is more to life than proving myself to others," Willem replied. "You showed me the courage to seek what I truly want." Gildentress smiled, a warmth in his expression that Willem had not seen before. "And what do you want, Willem?" For a moment, the world seemed to fall away, leaving only the two of them in the golden light. Though they did not speak of promises or futures, something passed between them, a silent understanding, a bond that needed no words. Tonight, they will rest. Tomorrow, a whole new adventure begins.